Everyone, welcome to the next installment of Charts in Perspective, where we use charts to dive into the world of economics and financial markets. I'm Jennifer Nash, an economic and market research analyst for Verify. Today, we're going to look at our monthly update for U.S. workers who work multiple jobs. The BLS uses the household survey to capture data for 4 subcategories of the multi-job workforce. This pie chart here shows what those subcategories are and the relative size of each one. The distinction between primary and secondary jobs is a subjective one determined by the survey participant. And not included in this pie chart is approximately the 0.05% of workers who work part-time in what they consider their primary job and full-time on their secondary job. Now, the BLS has 3 decades of historical data on multiple job holders in the US that we're going to review in this video to get a sense of long-term trends and where we're at now. Here's a look at all multiple job holders as a percentage of all civilians employed. The dots are the monthly data points, and the solid line is the 12-month moving average, which helps give us a clear sense of the overall trend. In our latest monthly data from July, there were 8.402 million people working multiple jobs in the US. When we take that as a percentage of the entire employment level, we learn that multiple job holders now account for 5.2% of civilian employment, marking the 11th straight month that multiple job holders have made up 5% or more of total employed persons, which is the longest streak since the run-up to the 2020 pandemic. At that point, it was 17 months. Now, to put the latest number in a more historical context, the all-time high for multiple job holders as a percent of employed workers was 6.6 back in 1996. And the all-time low was 4% in May 2020, at the height of the COVID pandemic. While it seems like our current number fits right in the middle of this range, I do want to point out that just in this past year, we've reached levels last seen almost 15 years ago. So it's safe to say that we are currently in the middle of a significant shift to labor market dynamics and the type of work people are taking on. But as you can see from this chart, the monthly data points can be quite volatile. So let's shift our focus to the 12-month moving average. This moving average peaked in the summer of 1997, but then began trending downward. Between the dot-com recession and the Great Recession, it hung between 5 and 5.5%, but then saw a somewhat sharp decline following the Great Recession. It then hovered slightly below 5% between the Great Recession and the COVID recession, before a steep decline after the pandemic, where it reached as low as 4.4% in 2021. But since then, over the past 3 years, the trend has reversed and is now above pre-pandemic levels. The moving average currently sits at 5.17%, its highest level since January 2010. A major difference between now and 2010 is that the percent of multiple job holders was trending down during 2010 following the Great Recession, versus where we are now, it's clearly on its way up. So our next chart here looks at all 4 categories that we referenced in the pie chart. Let's focus on each category separately. First, those working multiple full-time jobs, the red line. From this chart, it's clear that it has been the most stable category over time. However, it's difficult to notice any specific trends over time because of the relatively small shifts in movement. So we're going to zoom in for our next chart. Those who worked multiple full-time jobs have made up around 0.15 to 0.25% of all those employed across our time frame, a relatively small range. But notice that recently, over the past 3 years, we've reached some of the highest levels since we began tracking this data. Further evidence that the labor market is currently undergoing a shift in dynamics. Next, let's take a look at those who work full-time in their primary job and part-time in their secondary job, the purple line. This is the largest category of the 4, so it makes sense that it follows most closely with the overall trend of multiple job holders. It peaked in the mid-90s, gradually declined, remained somewhat steady between recessions, and most recently has been on a rapid rise, reaching its highest level since the turn of the century. I've said it before, but I'll say it again. Labor market dynamics are currently undergoing a major shift regarding the type of work people are taking on. Now, lastly, I want to look at the next 2 categories together. They behave differently at separate times than the other categories. When we compare all 4 categories on the same chart, it's difficult to notice their outlier performance because of how the axis is scaled. So again, we've zoomed in on this chart. There's 2 things that I notice. One, the Great Recession noticeably increased the percentage of multiple part-time job holders, the blue line, but it had the opposite effect on our other subcategories. And 2, those who had their hours vary between full and part-time for either their primary or secondary job, the green line, did not recover after the pandemic like we saw for the others. It even seems that this continuous downward trend for this cohort, the green line, has contributed to the rise of those working exclusively part-time jobs, the blue line. Now, I want to close out by saying that the BLS's monthly employment report is a wide collection of data, and the multiple job holders data is just a tiny piece of the puzzle. Nevertheless, as we undergo the current shift to labor market dynamics, this is a metric that I'll continue to keep a close eye on. That's all for our discussion. Thank you for tuning in. For more economic and market insights, you can find my content regularly on the Advisor Perspectives website under the AP Chart section.